sorrow all through his days. I am a man of constant sorrow. I've seen
All right, that is Multiculturalism. That's one of my favorite songs, which is a good Southern country song. But as we look at multiculturalism, we're going to focus on this article, and I'm going to slide some videos in, of course, and we'll try to keep a good transition from point to point. This article is Where Did We Go Wrong? 8 Characteristics of a Multicultural School, written in 2015. As we scroll down, I'm going to highlight a section for you. It says that understanding issues related to diversity, right here, and cultural competence is critical to functioning peacefully in our diverse society. One solution was developing guidelines for multicultural schools and its curriculum by culturally responsive expert educators. So we see a key term, which is culturally responsive expert educators. And we'll see that again. So at this point, let's just go ahead and slide over to a video which will show you about a principal's perspective.
How can you let 52% of your students, 1 in every 2 students, failing your English, math, and science class, and even 28% is too high for social studies.
My name is Greg Green, and I am Clintondale High School principal and curriculum coordinator for grades 6 through 12. When we evaluated our failure rate last year from our freshmen, we found that in English language arts, our freshmen were failing at a 52% rate. And in mathematics, they were failing at a 44% rate, science, a 41% rate, and then social studies, a 28% rate. And as a principal, it's just unconscionable to have that going on in your building.
To continue doing the same thing and think you're going to get a different result isn't going to work. So we sat down and we said we got to try something different.
Because we felt like the class time, was probably the most crucial time that we had with students.
We decided to flip it and try spending more time working with the students in class and having them get the lecture and the lessons at home.
This allows us to get more one-on-one time with them. I'm not speaking to a mass group.
By having homework done within class, we quadrupled the time that students and the teachers actually work together in, going over and learning the information.
My name is Mike Wright. I came here when I was in 8th grade. Coming from Detroit Public Schools, it's real different.
Why'd you come from Detroit?
Yeah, last year Mike Kwan was a freshman in the class, and he was struggling, and he'd have a problem, and say problem number 1 was difficult for him. He couldn't do it at home, so he would give up. So all of his homework was empty, it was blank.
Well, now I'm sitting there, I can see his frustration, I can go help him, I can get him past number 1, now he can do 2, 3, 4, 5. He's got trouble with problem number 6 again, I can help him.
But the biggest surprise is the results. When we did go to the flip model, we had no failures. No one failed. There's a kid now, unfortunately, he doesn't go here anymore because, he just was that far behind. He had to go to an alternative high school. But it was the only class he passed here in the high school.
By reversing the instructional model, what we did is we actually seen a dramatic reduction in percentage of students who are failing. And in ELA, the percentages went from 52% to 19%. In math, we went from 44% to 13%. And in science, we went from 41% to 19%. And in social studies, we went from 28 to actually under 10%. And so what we've seen is a huge reduction in failure by reversing the instructional model, which doesn't cost any money. My name is Greg Green. I'm a principal. I'm a husband. I'm a father. And I'm using Camtasia Relay to flip my high school.
So that article does a really good job of talking about at-risk students, and that's where we see it, this part right here. The context of teaching has changed as our society has changed, just as the context for literacy practices have changed. Yesterday's standards for teaching and teacher education will not support the kinds of learning that tomorrow's teachers must nurture among students who will be asked in the next millennium to meet literacy demands that our grandparents could not fathom. So when I read that paragraph right there, I definitely wrote a quick note that said, are teachers willing to change? And if we're not willing to change, then we're really hurting our students. And teachers must stay fresh. They really do. After the first year of teaching, a teacher would be benefited by reflecting on what they have learned and what they've experienced. And pretty much every year, if a teacher will reflect and go, okay, I'm getting behind on this, or I need to do better. There's a lot of videos out there, and I have found this next video, which is a first-year teacher who is reflecting on what she's learned throughout her experience of 180 days of teaching. So let's just go down her path and see. It's a vlog, a video blog, where she's just talking about what she's learned in education after 1 year of teaching.
Hey everyone, so today's video is a little bit different than the normal for me. As many of you may know, I am in my first year of teaching. I'm almost done. My last day is on June 25th. Now that I'm nearing the end of my first year, I've been getting a lot of questions from a couple people about how my experience was and what it's like being a first year teacher and all that fun stuff. So I'm just going to kind of talk about in this video, give a couple tips and tricks that I have kind of picked up along the way, a lot of lessons that I've learned, no pun intended.
What? Okay, anyway.
So the first thing that you need to realize when you become a teacher is the obvious thing, which, you know, you're getting a job because you want to make money, you want to have a living and to live independently and all that stuff. To be honest, I lived with my parents for the first 6 months of teaching, and that's just because I could not afford living on my own until I saved up money. So you don't get that much money being a teacher, to be honest. In my area, it's enough to live on, definitely, but not enough where you can have like your own car insurance and cell phone bill and all that fun stuff. So just keep that in mind when you are teaching. Don't do it for the money. Obviously, I don't think anyone's going to do it for the money with how low the salary is, but just don't expect to have a lot of money, I guess, when you're teaching compared to a lot of other professions. It depends on if you go to grad school, if you have a master's, if you have a PhD, which I do not have. I just have a BA. So I have the lowest salary, I guess you could say, but in my county, if you have so many hours of master's classes, like if you have 15 hours, you get another step increase, and then 30 hours is another step increase. If you get your master's, it's another step increase. So if you do attend school, you can get those step increases in your pay, and actually a lot of counties offer like help if you want to get a master's or something. When you're interviewing, and for me, I interviewed at a lot of different schools and I actually got an offer for a school. It was 6th grade, emotional disabilities, kind of self-contained classroom, and the principals told me, okay, it's pretty much all boys. They're in 6th grade. We realize how little and short you are. I'm 5'3" and just very young. And, you know, I got that job offer, and for me, I was kind of in that crisis mode. I was like, oh my God, I don't have a job. Oh my God. And my advice is to not immediately take that first job. And this is why. For me, I was in that, like I said, that crisis mode. I was like, oh my God, I do not have a job. I need to get a job. And once you get that offer, it's kind of like, hallelujah, finally. But you have to kind of make sure that it's the right fit for you, because as I was thinking about it, I realized this is not the right fit for me. That sort of position was not the right fit for me. Although the principals were amazing, the school was fantastic, that particular position I did not feel was fit for me at that time. So I still applied. I had the offer, but I was still applying, and I ended up getting an interview with the school I'm at now, and I could not be happier, and I am so glad that I did not take that first offer. So when you're interviewing and you get that job offer, don't take it right away, because you might end up with something else that's even better suited for you. And yeah, I could not be happier where I am right now. I think the most important thing that I learned not only in student teaching, but my first year of teaching, is to collaborate with all the other teachers in the school. For being a special ed teacher, I feel like it's a lot easier to collaborate just because you're forced to. You work with all these other general education teachers, you work with the school psychologist, you work with the principal, you work with parents and all the occupational therapists, physical therapists, like all these different people. You have to collaborate with them in order to kind of figure out the best needs for the child and everything. So it was relatively easy for me because I was kind of forced to collaborate with other professionals because of the nature of my job. But being a general education teacher, I find that it can be a little easier to kind of stay secluded. I think it's really important to collaborate when you're teaching just because you need that support. And you kind of need to feed off of other people's opinions and ideas. And I've gotten so many ideas from all my coworkers about, different things, especially being a first year teacher. It's just really difficult. Like, you're bombarded with all this stuff that you have to do, and collaborating definitely helps. So leave the door open that's one of my tips. Leave the door open. It's so easy to close our door and kind of work in a secluded space, but I tend to keep my door open just in case people want to come in and out and talk to me about things. So another thing is to stay organized, and that is only because I know a lot of counties do this. I think every state does this now. A lot of teachers are under pressure to keep documentation of everything, even like phone calls, emails, all that kind of stuff. And not only to, stay professional, but to show that you're competent as a teacher. I have my handy dandy binder here, and I'm covering up my last name just for safety reasons. And this is my binder. It's my documentation log. And basically throughout the year as a first year teacher, I collected data and all sort of artifacts to show that I'm competent as a teacher. And this is kind of what it looks like on the inside. And in my county, there are 7 standards that we have to kind of show artifacts for. So standard 1 is professional knowledge. And this basically has to do with professional development. So as a first year teacher, you have a lot of different things to go to and different classes to go to learn different techniques and stuff. So I actually have one of my artifacts as like some of my certificates and stuff from those different classes. Another one is instructional planning. It's just showing that you know how to plan different things. And this is my weekly plan. This is what it looks like. I do these on a weekly basis. Just to show the standards that I'm going to teach, and I keep things really organized by showing times and what different subject areas I'm going to teach, especially in special education. You have a lot of different grade levels and the different standards that you have to meet, not only in like the curriculum, but also for their IEP, like social skills and all those different kinds of different goals, I guess. So I kind of try to keep it organized in here. Keeping a binder like this really keeps me on top of being organized and keeping all these things in one place. I just find it really helpful as a first year teacher. This is definitely one of the really big key things that I've learned in my first year is to keep organized. And because now that I've kept everything organized, the end of the year, this documentation log has been super easy to compile. Another tip that I have, and it depends on your personality type. For me, this is relatively easy, but for a lot of first-year teachers, I would recommend to stay out of gossiping and drama and all that stuff. You would not believe the kind of drama that ensues in the elementary level of any sort of profession. I feel like there's just so much drama when it comes to teaching and any sort of work environment. I've had a lot of instances where I've kind of been in the middle of people telling me things, and I've tried to stay very neutral and like Switzerland and like stay out of it, because you really don't want to find yourself in a situation where you say something about someone else and then it not only gets another person in trouble, but you in trouble. And it's just, I would definitely recommend to stay out of gossipy drama, just because it will not only benefit you, but it will benefit the whole work environment. And my last tip, and this is the most obvious one of all, I kind of touched on it at the beginning, but I feel like in order to teach, you have to really, really love what you're doing. And even for me, and I can't imagine myself doing anything else at all. Like, this is definitely my dream job. I love it. I find it really hard some days to keep my cool as a special education teacher, and any teacher, but specifically for me, special education, there's a lot of different issues that pop up, a lot of behavior issues, and just trying to reflect every day to make sure that you're keeping yourself in line and to tell yourself the reasons why that you're in your job and why you love it. And that goes with any profession. I think that you really need to reflect each day and just kind of remind yourself why you're doing what you're doing. It's really helped me along the way, and it's also helped me to kind of like talk to other people, like my family, my friends, my boyfriend, and try to just keep that in check in your mind, because sometimes you kind of, intensify how bad things are, I guess. And I really just should suggest to kind of just really remind yourself why you love what you're doing. And if you don't love teaching in your first year and you realize, wow, I really don't want to be doing this, it's probably the best idea to just kind of pursue something different. And that's just because teaching is one of those really high stress situations and a lot of pressure. So yeah, definitely make sure you love what you're doing, whether it is that you love teaching in your first year, if you don't. And I think that's just one of the biggest tips as a first year teacher, and just kind of keep that in check. So that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you have any more questions, please leave them down below. I'd love to answer them for you. I know this video is not for everyone, but there were a couple people that asked questions, and I was really eager to make this video. So hope you guys have a wonderful day, and good luck if you're interviewing to be a teacher or you're just graduating. Good luck to you. All right, I'm going to go now. Bye.
Okay, so that's a very informative first-year teaching experience. In this paragraph right here, it says that recognizing that each person is unique with different learning styles is a key element of multiculturalism. Also, employment of educators who are capable of being more of a facilitator rather than a teacher or lecturer. See that as a big key element throughout all of our research, is they're wanting us to get away from this idea of just basic lecture and get into the more of the aspect that students should be learning on their own, and that we should really guide them through the process by showing videos, by doing audio, but also by helping them and really making it more of a differentiated instruction and a direct instruction where you're catering it to the student by understanding the student's needs. Can we agree that children emulate the significant role models in their lives and respond to stimuli based upon expectations and learned reactions, behaviors from those role models? So role models are a key element. I tried to find a role model video, and there's a lot of them out there. I'll let you do the search on your own on that one. But a role model is a very powerful item for students. And when we have multicultural education, we need to make sure we have a diversity of role models. This right here says, no one is born speaking an academic language. Exposure to this through literature, reading, and writing increases a student's potential for success in schooling. So we need to keep that in mind as well. We're there to be a role model in academics as well as culturally if we can. So that's the first page, and I made a lot of notes there. And you'll notice they have number 1 is cultural considerations. And number 2, they list 3 throughout this article. Multicultural implications. And I put a big $sign when I read this part right here. It has proven to be less costly to devote more funds to teacher education and staff development or a latest package program than to continuously find the various corrective programs such as Title I, Title VII, teen pregnancy, dropouts, juvenile detention centers, and adult literacy programs. So this whole section here says that money-wise, it's better to train people like you, educators, on multiculturalism and how to reach all of your students than to make the corrections after that something has occurred. This next part talks about money, this next video. It is a video by Ken Robinson, who he does a lot of TED Talks, but this one group also took his words and they did a graphic for it. So it kind of made a really good video. So I'll show that at this time.
Every country on earth at the moment is reforming public education. There are two reasons for it. The first of them is economic. People are trying to work out, how do we educate our children to take their place in the economies of the 21st century? How do we do that? Given that we can't anticipate what the economy will look like at the end of next week, as the recent turmoil is demonstrating. How do we do that? The second, though, is cultural. Every country on earth is trying to figure out, how do we educate our children so they have a sense of cultural identity and so that we can pass on the cultural genes of our communities while being part of the process of globalization. How do we square that circle? The problem is they're trying to meet the future by doing what they did in the past. And on the way, they're alienating millions of kids who don't see any purpose in going to school. When we went to school, we were kept there with a story, which is if you worked hard and did well and got a college degree, you would have a job. Our kids don't believe that. And they're right not to, by the way. You're better having a degree than not, but it's not a guarantee anymore. And particularly not if the route to it marginalizes most of the things that you think are important about yourself. Some people say we have to raise standards as if this is a breakthrough. You know, like, really, yes, we should. Why would you lower them? You know, I mean, I haven't come across an argument that persuades me of lowering them. But raising them, of course we should raise them. The problem is that the current system of education was designed and conceived and structured for a different age. It was conceived in the intellectual culture of the Enlightenment and in the economic circumstances of the Industrial Revolution. Before the middle of the 19th century, there were no systems of public education. Not really. I mean, you could get educated by Jesuits, you know, if you had the money. But public education, paid for from taxation, compulsory to everybody and free at the point of delivery, that was a revolutionary idea. And many people objected to it. They said it's not possible for many street kids, working class children, to benefit from public education. They're incapable of learning to read and write, and why are we spending time on this? So there's also built into it a whole series of assumptions about social structure and capacity. It was driven by an economic imperative of the time, but running right through it was an intellectual model of the mind, which was essentially the Enlightenment view of intelligence. That real intelligence consists in the capacity for a certain type of deductive reasoning and a knowledge of the classics originally, what we come to think of as academic ability. And this is deep in the gene pool of public education, that there are really two types of people, academic and non-academic, smart people and non-smart people. And the consequence of that is that many brilliant people think they're not, because they've been judged against this particular view of the mind. So we have twin pillars, economic and intellectual. And my view is that this model has caused chaos in many people's lives. It's been great for some. There have been people who have benefited wonderfully from it. But most people have not. Instead, they suffer this. This is the modern epidemic, and it's as misplaced and it's as fictitious. This is the plague of ADHD. Now, this is a map of the incidence of ADHD in America, or prescriptions for ADHD. Don't mistake me here. I don't mean to say there is no such thing as attention deficit disorder. I'm not qualified to say if there is such a thing. I know that a great majority of psychologists and paediatricians think there is such a thing. But it's still a matter of debate. What I do know for a fact is it's not an epidemic. These kids are being medicated as routinely as we had our tonsils taken out. And on the same whimsical basis, and for the same reason, medical fashion. Our children are living in the most intensely stimulating period in the history of the earth. They're being besieged with information and calls for their attention from every platform, computers, from iPhones, from advertising holdings, from hundreds of television channels. And we're penalizing them now for getting distracted. From what? You know, boring stuff. At school, for the most part. It seems to me it's not a coincidence totally that the incidence of ADHD has risen in parallel with the growth of standardized testing. Now, these kids are being given Ritalin and Adderall and all manner of things, often quite dangerous drugs, to get them focused and calm them down. But according to this, attention deficit disorder increases as you travel east across the country. People start losing interest in Oklahoma. They can hardly think straight in Arkansas. And by the time they get to Washington, they've lost it completely. And there are separate reasons for that, I believe. It's a fictitious epidemic. If you think of it, the arts, and I don't say this exclusively of the arts, I think it's also true of science and of maths, but I say about the arts particularly because they are the victims of this mentality currently, particularly. The arts especially address the idea of aesthetic experience. An aesthetic experience is one in which your senses are operating at their peak, when you're present in the current moment, when you're resonating with the excitement of this thing that you're experiencing, when you are fully alive. An anesthetic is when you shut your senses off and deaden yourself to what's happening. And a lot of these drugs are that. We're getting our children through education by anesthetizing them. And I think we should be doing the exact opposite. We shouldn't be putting them asleep. We should be waking them up to what they have inside of themselves. But the model we have is this. I believe we have a system of education that is modeled on the interests of industrialism and in the image of it. I'll give you a couple of examples. Schools are still pretty much organized on factory lines, ringing bells, separate facilities, specialized into separate subjects. We still educate children by batches. We put them through the system by age group. Why do we do that? Why is there this assumption that the most important thing kids have in common is how old they are? It's like the most important thing about them is their date of manufacture. You know what I mean? Well, I know kids who are much better than other kids at the same age in different disciplines, or at different times of the day, or better in smaller groups than in large groups, or sometimes they want to be on their own. If you're interested in the model of learning, you don't start from this production line mentality. It's essentially about conformity, and increasingly it's about that as you look at the growth of standardized testing and standardized curricula. And it's about standardization. I believe we've got to go in the exact opposite direction. That's what I mean about changing the paradigm. There was a great study done recently of divergent thinking. It was published a couple of years ago. Divergent thinking isn't the same thing as creativity. I define creativity as the process of having original ideas that have value. Divergent thinking isn't a synonym, but it's an essential capacity for creativity. It's the ability to see lots of possible answers to a question, lots of possible ways of interpreting a question, to think what Edward de Bono would probably call laterally, to think not just in linear or convergent ways, to see multiple answers, not one. So, there are tests for this. One kind of cod example would be people might be asked to say, how many uses can you think of for a paperclip? One of those routine questions. Most people might come up with 10 or 15. People who are good at this might come up with 200. And they do that by saying, well, could the paperclip be 200 foot tall and be made out of foam rubber? Does it have to be a paperclip as we know it, Jim? Now, there are tests for this, and they gave them to 1,500 people. This is in a book called Breakpoint and Beyond. And on the protocol of the test, if you scored above a certain level, you'd be considered to be a genius at divergent thinking. Okay? So my question to you is, what percentage of the people tested, of the 1,500, scored at genius level for divergent thinking? Now, you need to know one more thing about them. These were kindergarten children. So what do you think? What percentage at genius level? 80. 80, okay. 98%. Now, the thing about this was it was a longitudinal study. So they retested the same children 5 years later, ages of 8 to 10. What do you think? 50? They retested them again 5 years later, ages 13 to 15. You can see a trend here, can't you? Now, this tells an interesting story, because you could have imagined it going the other way, couldn't you? You start off not being very good, but you get better as you get older. But this shows two things. One is we all have this capacity, and two, it mostly deteriorates. Now, a lot of things have happened to these kids as they've grown up. A lot. But one of the most important things that happened to them, I'm convinced, is that by now they've become educated. They've spent 10 years at school being told there's one answer, it's at the back. And don't look. And don't copy, because that's cheating. I mean, outside schools, that's called collaboration, but inside schools. Now, this isn't because teachers want it this way, it's just because it happens that way. It's because it's in the gene pool of education. We have to think differently about human capacity. We have to get over this old conception of academic, non-academic, abstract, theoretical, vocational, and see it for what it is, a myth. Secondly, we have to recognize that most great learning happens in groups, that collaboration is the stuff of growth. If we atomize people and separate them and judge them separately, we form a kind of disjunction between them and their natural learning environment. And thirdly, it's crucially about the culture of our institutions, the habits of the institution and the habitats that they occupy.